Hi, everybody. This is Bridget Conling with C3 Communications. I'm really glad you could join us today for How to Build an Effective Persona with Peter Panepento. Peter is formerly of Chronicle of Philanthropy, but we'll let him tell you a little more about himself in a minute or so. So thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Bridget. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited that we have so many people coming out for this conversation today.
So just to tell you a little bit more about ourselves, my name is Bridget. Like I said, I'm the Director of Content Marketing at C3. That's my contact information there. And so if you do have any questions after this webinar that we aren't able to answer here, you're welcome to email me or Peter. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so I'll be fielding the questions field on GoToWebinar. So if anything comes up, feel free to put it in there, and then when there's time, I'll bring it up so that Peter and I can respond. Also, if you're more of a Twitter type, Peter and I are using the hashtag C3 personas, that's CSEE3 personas. So if you want to add any questions in there, I'll be looking at Twitter as well throughout the presentation. Peter, do you want to talk a bit more about your background?
Sure. Thanks again for having me on today. I probably know several of you in the audience today through the work that I did at the Chronicle of Philanthropy for many years. I worked there as the first web editor and then later as their assistant managing editor, developing a lot of their new products, particularly digitally. I then left the Chronicle and took on a role at the Council on Foundations, again, doing a lot of work with product development, building a digital community, and really helping them reposition the organization for the future. And for about 4 or 5 months or so now, I've been working independently as a consultant, working largely with nonprofits and groups that support nonprofits with digital strategy, content marketing, social media strategy, and the like. So really excited to be able to have a chance to talk to everybody today about audience personas and about really being able to tie your audience and their goals to the content you're creating.
Do I hear you adjusting your headset a bit there, Peter?
No, that wasn't me. So.
Oh, okay. I'm getting some questions that there's a bit of an echo on yours, so if you do have a headset and want to put that on, I think that might help a bit to respond to some of those questions there.
Okay. I will try to switch over to that right now, as a matter of fact.
All right.
Sound better now?
Yeah, that sounds clear. And feel free, if anyone, anybody else in the audience is hearing an echo anymore, just let us know.
Okay, great. So did you want to talk a little bit about C3, Bridget?
Yes, I would love to. So C3, as many of you probably already know, we're the digital agency for do-gooders, and we work specifically with nonprofits and social causes, activating people to change the world. We really have 3 teams here. One is web, one is strategy, and one is video. We're really well known for being one of the leaders in video for nonprofits. We also have a really impressive web team who have built out some beautiful websites that I've had the pleasure of seeing come into creation in the past few months. And then Michael and I and our Chief Learning Officer, Lisa, head up our strategy team. And we do digital engagement campaigns, social media strategy, and everything in between. And we'd love to work with you or your organization if you do have a need in any of those areas. You're welcome to reach out to me. And below are just a few examples of some of the clients we've worked with in the past.
Terrific. Well, before we start our discussion today, we're going to do a little bit of our own market research. We're going to be talking quite a bit today about how you can get to better know your audience so you can develop a content strategy that engages them. And we're going to practice what we preach. We really want today's conversation to be tailored toward you and your pain points. So we're going to ask you a few questions to get a better sense of who you are and why you're here today. Our first question is a very simple one. Does your organization have a written content marketing strategy?
So I just launched the poll and it's in progress. I can see the votes coming in. We've got about 40%, 50%, and get the rest of those votes in. I'm going to close this poll out shortly. All right. And now I'm going to share the results. So we see, does your organization have a written content marketing strategy? 20% say yes, 80% say no. So that's really good for Peter and I to know going into this, is that maybe, I'm assuming probably a lot of you have heard of content strategy. Maybe you're thinking about developing a content strategy for your organization, but it can be hard to actually get those plans onto paper and make it something actionable when you're dealing with the day-to-day grind of working at a nonprofit or for a social cause. Peter, do you have any response to that, the 80-20 split there?
Yeah, I'm not that surprised because I do think taking the time to actually come up with a written strategy, especially for organizations that don't have a lot of resources, that is a difficult and sometimes time-consuming step to take. I think hopefully the discussion we have today, even if you don't have a written strategy, you can at least start to get a better sense of how to think about your audience differently and start to build a better understanding of who they are and start to align your content in a way that really reaches and connects with them.
Great. So I'm going to hide these results here and go to our next poll.
Okay. And this is really about your resources. What's your budget for content marketing this year?
All right, poll is in progress. I see you've got about 20% of votes in. Going up quickly here, we're at 50% now. And let's get the rest of these votes in. I'll close this poll shortly. All right. And here are the results. Okay, so you can see smaller budgets here. I may have been too high with my multiple choice questions. So a lot of people have between 0 and 5K. We've got a few in the 6K, and then a couple lucky people out there, 16K plus. So Peter, any response to that?
It really, I think, speaks to really the reality for a lot of nonprofits is that the budgets aren't big and the resources aren't great. So it's not a huge surprise, but it certainly does pose challenges for a lot of organizations to be able to be strategic and deliberate when their budgets are so small.
So true. All right, and let's go to the last question here.
Okay, this one's a little more difficult. What's the biggest barrier to improving your content marketing efforts?
So I know there are probably a lot of different answers you could say here. I intentionally made this so that you could only select one answer. So looking at these, the questions on here as I launch this poll, or the options on here as I launch this poll, pick the one thing that you feel like is the biggest barrier to improving your content marketing efforts. I'm seeing a lot come in for unclear understanding of your target audiences, so that's great. You are in the right place in this webinar. All right, we've got about 80% voted. I'm going to close this poll shortly, get those last votes in. Okay, and here are the results. Now this is interesting. Okay, so we see about 20% not enough budget, 31% not enough staff support, 35% unclear understanding of your target audiences. Nicely done signing up for this webinar. And only 15% unclear understanding of your organization's goals. So I'm really glad that a lot of you do have a very good understanding of what the goals of your organization are. I think that's so important and sometimes can feel a bit ambiguous to specific campaigns. But I think that is, as Peter will talk about a bit more, that is one of the easier parts of developing a target audience when you work for a nonprofit. And it's glad to see that even though we have a lot of people working with smaller budgets here, that doesn't really feel like the biggest barrier. You feel like once you have a better idea of what the strategy is and who you're talking to, you can really do some good work. Do you have any thoughts here, Peter?
Well, I think the fact that so many of you have a clear understanding of your goals is a really good thing in terms of being able to define your audiences, because it makes it a lot easier if you know what the organization wants to accomplish, to be able to actually define who your audience is, at a very broad level, but then also to be able to do kind of the deeper digging that we're going to be talking about today to really get to know what motivates them and how you can connect with them better.
All right, so I'll hide the results here, and then I'm going to open up my questions again. So if you do have any questions, please share them here. I'll also add the hashtag in here again. And I'm sorry if you guys are still getting an echo. I think, let's see, I think Peter's got his headset on, so we're going to keep moving forward with that.
Yeah, I apologize for that. I think I've done everything technically I can to avoid it, so I really apologize on that. But I want to thank all of you for sharing the information you just shared with us and for taking the time to join us today. I know your time is really precious, so I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this conversation is valuable to you. And giving the responses to the questions, this sounds like this is a really important and timely topic for a lot of people who are joining us today. So I'm glad you're here, and I really hope we're able to deliver on something that meets your needs and helps your organization moving forward. So earlier this week, I was in my car and listening to NPR, and they had a piece about Bob Dylan's new album, which is about well, the album itself is essentially a tribute to some of the classical songs that Frank Sinatra and others had done. If you're like me, you might have a hard time putting your head around the idea that one of the counterculture heroes of the 60s would be covering Sinatra. It doesn't seem like it really connects, right? But in the interview that Dylan had offered in support of the new album, which interestingly was granted exclusively to AARP, the magazine, he noted that he had always been a big fan of Sinatra, and he was a fan because Sinatra had a rare quality as a singer. Sinatra, according to Dylan, was a master of singing to rather than at the audience. So what does that have to do with nonprofit marketing? Well, quite a bit, actually. We're living in an era where it's really easy to talk to rather than at the people we most want to reach. We have almost unlimited platforms to build community, to share useful information, to create connections that will lead more of our supporters to take action. And we really no longer have to rely on traditional media to tell our stories. We no longer have to draft press releases and jump up and down to get attention. We can create powerful stories and build deep connections and drive action. And the organizations that are the most effective at getting the results this way aren't talking about themselves very much. They're not using the equivalent of the big check photo, which is what I think is the ultimate expression of me first communications. And I'm sorry if you might be guilty of using this tactic at your organization. And don't worry, we're not going to ask a poll question about it either. But if you've arranged to have a big check made to mark a big donation, and then you've asked your CEO or executive director to pose awkwardly with some other uncomfortable executives in suits, you're probably practicing you first communications. You're not talking to your audience, you're talking at your audience. But I think there's a much different and more productive path. And it involves creating content that's not about you, it's about your audience. Some of the most effective nonprofit communications these days are focused not on the nonprofit creating the campaign, they are focused on the people that the nonprofit is trying to reach. UNICEF, which you saw earlier in Bridget's outline, is a C3 client, is just one of a number of organizations that really understand this. The example you're seeing on your screen right now isn't really about what UNICEF is doing to help children in crisis. It's all about what you can do to help children in crisis, and you being the audience. It speaks directly to the audience and gives them practical ideas for how they can make a difference. It might seem really simple, but creating effective communications that connect with your target audience isn't always easy. It is very easy for us to talk about our organizations. That's why we still see so many examples of news releases, blog posts, annual reports, and videos that really are talking specifically about our charities and the work we do. It's a little bit harder, but it's still kind of easy to define what we want our communications to achieve. And that gets back to knowing your organizational goals. If you're an advocacy organization, for instance, you know that you want your communications to drive people to take a certain action, whether it's writing their Congress people about an important bill or pushing companies to limit their emissions, for example. If you work at a health charity, you might want to raise awareness about prevention or screening, or actually get people to donate to help find a cure to that disease. If you work for the United Way, you might want to promote the power of giving. But it's not easy, and it's really hard to accomplish these goals if you don't understand who you're trying to reach. And that's not as easy as it sounds. A lot of groups define their target audience as everyone. Or they know generally that they want to reach, say, environmentally conscious middle-class women, but they don't really know what what the people in those audiences are really motivated by, what makes them tick, and what they care about. And it's yet even more difficult is to take the following step, and that's actually telling stories and generating content that connects with that audience. Before you can really do this, though, you have to understand who your target audience is. And in a couple of minutes, we're going to see some tools that will help you do just that. We're going to talk about developing audience personas. And these personas, if they're used properly, can really guide all of your content. So what's the difference between an organization that understands its audience and focuses its communications on reaching that audience and one that doesn't? Well, it can be pretty easily demonstrated with a couple of examples that I found recently on some real actual nonprofit websites. And I'm sorry if we have anyone here today from the ARC, but this type of headline, which is pulled directly from its website, is an example of how many organizations are not paying attention to their audiences and kind of ignoring them. This is kind of a real classic me first communications. It's really talking about what the organization is trying to do. It's not really trying to motivate an action. It's really talking about something that's very specific about the ARC and its work. It's kind of the written equivalent of the big check photo. The difference is really with organizations that understand and speak to their audiences, they actually make the audience the subject of their communications. They don't put themselves first. Their focus is squarely on their audience. You'll see that here with this call to action. Again, taken this week from a prominent charity website. This call to action doesn't even mention the name of the nonprofit at all. It's directed at the audience, and it's calling on them to take an action. And then it provides that audience with the tools they need to take that action. Again, the charity's name isn't even mentioned. But you can be sure that this communication was more likely to achieve its goal than what we saw with the previous example. And you can be sure that the people who were motivated to take that action will remember where they saw this and will be coming back, even though the charity's name isn't blazoned across it. And they're even probably more likely than others to be telling their friends about it. And I can almost guarantee you that the charity that put this campaign together knew exactly who they wanted to appeal to when they did this. They knew their goals, they knew who they wanted to reach, and then they created content that connected those goals to that audience. So how do you begin to understand your audiences so that we can create the type of meaningful connection that we really want to create? Perhaps the most effective way to do this is through the creation of an audience persona. Audience personas are essentially profiles of the people you want your content to reach. And in most cases, the persona itself is fictional, meaning that the persona you're creating isn't one single person. It's a kind of a person that embodies the audience that you want to reach. You assign your persona a name and then assign traits to that person that are based on actual research and data. These personas can become integral parts of the development of your content marketing strategy. And they can be guiding documents that you can refer to when you're launching a new campaign, creating a new video, or writing a new report. We'll be sharing a number of examples of personas at the end of this presentation so you can have some concepts that you can work with when you're creating your own. So personas are really used in a lot of industries, and they're not unique to nonprofits. In fact, they're really a big part of what you see in the communications and advertising and marketing campaigns of companies. Advertising and marketing companies often create personas when they're launching a new advertising campaign, for instance. Chances are, if you watch the Super Bowl, many of the ads that you saw on Sunday were created based on personas of who the companies wanted their ads to reach. Budweiser, for instance, likely wanted to reach a certain demographic with the cute horse and puppy ad that so many people saw and reacted to. And they probably wanted to reach a very different demographic with their Up for Anything ad. For those who remember those ads, it's pretty clear that their creators spent a lot of time trying to make sure that those ads spoke to the values and interests of the people they were trying to reach. For nonprofits, they're not looking to get beer consumers. They're looking for something very different. And depending on what your goals are, you're trying very likely to reach prospective or current donors, your volunteers, peer-to-peer fundraisers, lawmakers who might be able to help pass a bill that will benefit your cause, or activists in the field. So once you start to identify very broadly what those buckets or types of people are that you want to reach, you start to build profiles of those people in those distinct demographics. And to build those profiles, you really have to understand and articulate your goals. And the most basic question you want to ask is, what does your organization want to accomplish? How do you align your goals with the demographics of the people that you're trying to reach? So, you know generally that you want to reach donors, for instance, and you know generally what the goals of your organizations are. To dig deeper, you really need to define who you want to help you accomplish those goals. And within your broad categories, your categories of your donors or your volunteers, you will have and build out deeper distinctions. For a university, for instance, a donor is very likely to be an alumnus or somebody who sent their children to the institution, for instance. For a disease charity, it might be somebody who is grappling with that affliction, or the family of somebody who is grappling with that affliction. If you're an anti-poverty organization, the demographic might be completely different. And then from there, you drill even deeper. Often, you can do that digging and drilling just by mining your own data. If you have an email list and you've collected information about the folks on that email list, you can start to develop a sense of who your target audience is and who some of the key people are that you want to reach. And then you can use that information to start to develop profiles based on where they live, their occupation, or even their gender. And there are some great online tools that can help you do this. The US Census has some great demographic data that's broken out by community. A project I worked on at the Chronicle, How America Gives, provides some really great information about the giving habits of folks living in communities around the country, right down to their zip code. So if you are able to dig into your data and you know that your core audience is in a specific zip code, for instance, or in a county or in a state, you can use tools like this to even find out just how much money people are likely to give in that area, what the racial breakdown is, what the population is, what the income levels are, and you could start to really build some really interesting traits and habits out of that information. Another great tool for this is a tool that just came out from a group called Esri, and you could see the URL for it there. Again, you can drill into zip codes and get some really interesting profiles of the people that tend to live in those areas through this tool. So in a specific zip code, you can find out that what percentage of people are in different age breakdowns, and then start to and they mash up data with income and other levels to really start to give you a bit of a demographic profile of the people that live in those areas. They're doing some of that persona work for you. So kind of pulling out, if you look at a specific zip code, the 20037 zip code, you start to see who some of the top industry segments are in there, and then you can see the profiles that fall behind those. So these tools can really give you some high-level insights about your target audiences. And if you want to still drill even deeper, it's often valuable to take the extra step and actually survey or interview people in that target audience. If you really want to devote yourself to getting to know who you want to reach, sending out a survey, maybe doing a series of 3 to 5 interviews with some of the people that are on your list or who live in that area or who meet that profile that you're looking for can really give you a strong sense of what they're interested in, what really motivates them, what are some of their pain points, what are some of the things that you can do to help them alleviate those pain points and gain action. So in the case of a charity that is looking to drive people to donate, you can find out what are some of the causes that they really are interested in generally, and then start to develop communications that speak to some of the things that you do that connect with those things. So you essentially really want to start to think like a reporter. You want to be as objective as possible and piece together as much information as you can to produce a story or a profile about your target audience. If you think about what reporters do, they look at public information and data, they interview people, and they process information to create a story. That's really what you're trying to do here. You're trying to triangulate what you know generally from public information, what you know anecdotally from your conversations with people, and what you've gleaned from your own internal data to create a profile of the people that you're looking to reach. And that's what you're doing with your personas. And depending on your resources, you're going to gather as much information as you can and develop a pretty rich profile of that audience. So what do these look like? Well, before we go too much farther and before we start kind of opening up the conversation a bit, hopefully, I'm going to share a few examples of what these personas look like on the back end after you've done that research and after you've gathered your data. And the first one I'm going to share is a persona that we created at the Chronicle for directors of marketing and communications at nonprofits. Since many of you who are on this webinar today fall into this demographic, you can tell me later whether we actually got it right. So what we did when we did this, and it was a bit of a different audience than what you would do at a charity, but we essentially developed a job description for people who are in this demographic. And we used actual job descriptions, and we used conversations that we had with people who work in these roles to build out a typical job description and responsibilities. For the Chronicle, understanding this was really important. The Chronicle's audience is people who work in nonprofits, and one of the segments of that audience of nonprofit professionals are people who work in marketing and communications. So if we were to create content and to market to this group in a way that was effective, we really needed to understand what they do, what are some of the key things that motivate them, and really understand what they go through on a day-to-day level. We took it a step farther, and we actually assigned some real people to our personas. In addition to just having some general information and job descriptions, we actually put a face on it. We pulled out individuals who worked for different organizations, got a sense of what they do, and we talked to them a little bit about their jobs and what they find important and what kind of information they find to be most useful to help them do their jobs more effectively. And we also created personas and profiles for junior staff as well. And again, found out what their responsibilities are, what their titles are, and really got a sense of who they were in a really interesting way. For the Chronicle, this was really important for us to also determine their pain points. We wanted to know what they really cared most about so that we could serve up information to them that actually helped them do that. So in this case, wow, that notification just popped up in the middle of nowhere. I thought I turned all those off. I'm sorry about that.
Sorry, Peter. I'm sure we can
So
all sympathize with how many tabs you have open.
so so, again, we really wanted to find out what was most important to the people that we were trying to reach in this demographic. We know that that maintaining and protecting and promoting their nonprofits information or image was really most important to them. Identifying and prioritizing their own marketing channels is really important to them. Leveraging technology and social media to maximize donations is really important to them. So we really, we did our research, we did our homework, we talked to folks, and we then articulated and created some what became really useful personas to us. And we referred back to these as we were both marketing to that audience in direct marketing efforts, but also even on the editorial end of things when we were trying to make sure that we were creating content that appealed to and helped that group understand from the Chronicle how they could maximize and be most effective in their roles. Here's another example of how an organization puts together audience personas, and again, these are based on professionals. In this case, this is for a project that the Chronicle of Higher Education has done, really trying to understand better folks who work in academia. So they went out and started to get as good a sense of the goals and the pain points of people and the career paths of people that work in higher education. So they created a persona for Brett, kind of talking about his role and his work, and again, try to identify what his pain points are, what career path he's on, what he wants to do as his career unfolds. And started to think about what kinds of information to present to him so that we were really speaking directly to him and providing him with tools and resources that helped him achieve his goals in his career. Here's another kind of a different person in a different stage of his career. Again, kind of coming up with a money quote and some goals, and also kind of starting to look at his career path. Some of the things that are most important to him, and really start to develop a persona for him that again helped us to better understand how to better reach him. So a tool that I think is really helpful if you're going out and trying to create these personas is one that HubSpot has put together, and there are a lot of these other tools online. That help you start to fill out some of these things, and depending on what your organization's goals are, the job or career path of your persona audiences may not be as important, but things about demographics, some common identifiers about people in that persona type are really important. Their goals and what they're looking to achieve are very important. And again, if a donor, you're trying to figure out what their goals might be as a donor, what they're trying to achieve with that. If it's somebody who you're trying to reach in a more activist role, their goals are going to be a bit different. What are some of the challenges and barriers they face when they're making their decisions that would affect your organization? So for a donor, it might be understanding the impact of your charity and being able to understand how their donation is actually going to achieve results. Or it could be them understanding and trusting your organization in a different way, or feeling a personal connection to your cause. And then it involves asking questions about how you can then help them achieve those goals and overcome those challenges. What are some of the things that your organization can do with your content to actually speak to what's important to them, or help them feel as though that they can overcome a challenge? And then in a lot of cases, if you are going out and doing the research, and talking to folks, you might embed some real quotes in your persona, and and start to get a better sense of in their own words, what appeals to them. And then if you pull it out even further, what are some of the marketing messages that you want to create to connect with that audience? And if you were to run into somebody, not in a canned message, but if you were actually talking directly to somebody, what would your elevator pitch to them be? What would you be saying about your organization and the work you do that that really connects with the goals and the challenges that the people in that demographic would face? So let's say, for instance, you've identified that that 40-something women who are environmentally conscious is your target audience. If you are to reach or reach out or connect with somebody directly, what would you be saying to them? How would you be crafting that message to really connect with them? So I'm gonna take a step back now and kind of open this up for some questions and conversation, and to get some of Bridget's perspectives as well into this, because I think, Bridget, I think you have some ideas on how you then connect those personas to the content you create, and create some reminders that help you think about that audience as you're doing your work day to day.
Yes, absolutely. And I tried muting myself while you were talking there, so I think that helps with the audio a bit. So yes, I absolutely have ideas on how to use audience personas actually in practice every day. I think it's really important that these don't just become something that's in a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet that you look at every once in a while, but don't really think about critically or in your day-to-day work, especially for people who work in communications or marketing like myself. I think it's important to always be thinking about your audience, because something that we run into a lot as a marketing agency is working with clients who don't have a clear idea of who your audience is, and it becomes very hard to determine how to speak to them and what they would respond well to. You tend to fall back on the idea of, well, what sounds good to me? And what do I think would look good in this email or in this social media post? And you're not thinking with your audience at the center, which is so important if you really want to speak to people clearly. So something that I'm going to send out in the resources after this presentation are some really cool examples that I found from a brand I really like called MailChimp. I don't know how many of you use MailChimp for your email communications, but I think they're a really great company. And one of the things that they've done that I really admire is develop some actual posters that they hang around their office that have these really cool images of different audience personas. So they have the person's face, and then they have descriptive words that they came up with in their research that help them define who that audience is, so that they're always thinking about their audience. It's never not something that's right in their faces. And I thought that was a really cool approach, and that if you did have the resources, even doing something small like putting together something out of cut up magazines, or something really simple that you put together on a program like Photoshop, would be very cool to have just in front of your desk or in your office somewhere, so that you're always thinking very consciously about your audience and have that visual reminder there.
And I think that's really important. With your content and your content marketing. So any questions out there? We'd love to hear what's on your mind. What are some of the things that are coming to you as you're seeing and hearing about this? Do these examples resonate with you? Do they help you start to think about your audience differently? And even if you're not taking the step of creating personas, are they helping you get a sense of the kinds of questions you can be thinking about or asking yourself as you're writing and crafting your communications to really start to put the audience first as you're having your as you're planning out and actually putting together your content.
So we have a really good question here from Shayna Horwitz, who asks, how do you balance updating what's happening with your organization to your audience and not making it centered around me? So I think if I could unpack that a little bit. So how do you balance sharing news about what's happening within your org and still not sounding like you're just talking about yourself all the time, which I think is something that a lot of nonprofits run into because they have really great information that they want to share about what's going on at their org, and they need help figuring out how to do it in an audience-centered way. So what do you say to that, Peter?
Right. Well, that's a really good question because there are obviously times where you are talking about your organization, whether you're announcing something or you're putting out some new research or you have an event coming up. And the example I showed earlier of not even including the organization's name is a bit of an extreme example. Obviously, there are cases where in a lot of cases where you're going to do that. But I think even for those updates and information that you're putting out, if you can take the extra step and ask yourself, why does the audience care about this? What would they find useful and interesting in this? And start to even try to answer that question in a part of that announcement. Whether it means that it's going to help you deliver on your mission more effectively, or improve the conditions of lives in their community, or connect with them in some other way. If you can take that extra step and actually translate to the people you're trying to reach why this is important to them, rather than here's what our organization is doing, I think you can start to build into that messaging more of a focus on the audience and still achieve your goals of kind of getting that basic information and news out there.
That's great. And I want to keep going through our questions here because we have a lot coming in now. So Bill Gillard asks, first says this is very helpful. Glad you found this helpful, Bill. Bill wants to know, how do you create a cohesive plan or strategy when you have many different personas, which I know is something that C3 gets asked a lot anytime we talk about content strategy or audiences. A lot of nonprofits are speaking to a lot of different audiences. You have your donors, you have your volunteers, you have your constituents and people who you're impacting through your cause. So how do you develop different personas that will speak clearly to all those different audiences who have different goals and needs?
Right. Well, I think there's two different ways to approach this. One is finding what kind of the common threads are among those personas, and trying to make sure that you in kind of what you're doing that's reaching that entire audience, that you're trying to make sure that you're appealing to what's common across all of those groups. And as you put these personas together, you do start, if let's say you have 6 or 8 different demographics that you're looking to reach, there should be some level of commonality between them. There should be some shared goals and interests among them that you can try to appeal to. And you should also try to come up with some type of hierarchy of who you're trying to reach. Kind of the animal farm thing, everybody's equal, but some are more equal. I mean, which of those audiences are really the most important ones to you? And really start to kind of weigh your communications there. And then, of course, the other piece of this is segmenting. If you are able to segment your email list in email communications, you can start to develop different messages for each of those different audiences around some of the different things you're doing, or even thinking about which channels you're reaching people out into, and starting to think about maybe making the social media message different than you might do in your emails or on your website or in a written communication to your donors. Knowing where those people congregate and are means you can tailor your messages towards the personas that are most likely to be found in those different places. Does that make sense?
I think that makes great sense. And it actually responds to, there were a few other questions in here. I saw one from Michelle Gasparian about using personas in terms of social media posts. And I think you spoke to that a bit. And I'd also say that you can even segment it even more within your different social media channels. What I've found in my experience, I've worked a lot with social media, and your audience on Facebook is very different from your audience on Twitter, which is very different from your audience on Instagram, which is going to be different from your audience on Pinterest. And so I think that the more you can segment your audience and really try to develop content that's specific to each channel, the more successful your content's going to be. This doesn't mean that you need to make up drastically different content for each platform or each channel. But it means that you should think about how you're developing your content for each network. So for example, if I'm posting something on Pinterest, I want to make sure that it has really good graphic. And I know that Pinterest is probably predominantly women. So I'm going to think about this, about my more female audience. Whereas if I'm doing something on Facebook, I know that the audience is now probably a bit older. They're still interested in the graphics, so I could still use that graphic that I used on Pinterest. But maybe I'm thinking more about what both men and women would like to see on that network. So just being very conscious of that anywhere that you're putting your content, you're probably going to be speaking to a slightly different audience.
Right, and I think even and those are all great points, Bridget. And I think even building on that, if you do have multiple personas and you do communicate across multiple channels, it may even be worth it to build into your personas a section about where we reach these folks. You know, if you know if you're one of your targets is reaching you know, a certain demographic of donor, you may include in their persona, you know, where they interact with us as part of it, and it could be that they're more likely on Twitter, or that they are more likely to want your written annual report. You know, just maybe building that into your persona if that's important for your organization, to try to figure out how to tailor your messages to different types of people. That might be one way to build that into your persona creation process.
I want to get back to another question here. Kate Thomas asked something that's probably on a lot of your minds, is what are some suggestions you have for narrowing down your audience? Often we try to reach too many different groups of people, which I think is definitely something that a lot of nonprofits and social causes are a bit guilty of. We have a tendency to think that we know that our causes are important, so we want to think that our audience is the general public or all parents. But the truth is that if you can define those audiences a bit more, you're going to be much more successful with your messaging. So Peter, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, it starts really with your organization's goals. So, and if you have a hierarchy of goals for your organization, that starts to help you kind of develop the hierarchy of personas that you're trying to reach, and make some decisions about who's most important to you. And that is one of the most difficult parts of this process, is actually going through the process of deciding who you don't want to reach, or who, and it might not necessarily mean that you don't reach them, but that you're not weighing your communications toward that specific group. And part of that is tied to your goals. So if you know that your organization's big goal next year is to increase your fundraising by 10%, or launch a capital campaign, or persuade passage of a certain bill, you need to start to figure out who are the people within that kind of broad audience who are most likely to help you achieve that goal, and those are the audiences you might want to focus on more. Adjacent to that is looking at some of your data that you have about your organization and finding out who you're connecting with the most already. If you're very good at appealing to a certain group of people already, chances are that those people are the folks who are very interested in your organization already, and maybe there's room for you to get more of those folks or connect more with them directly, and you could start to make decisions based on that. At the Chronicle, it's when we went through this process, we knew we wanted to reach as much of the nonprofit world as we could possibly reach, but we narrowed down our focus and focused on some job categories that we thought were A, kind of the core parts of our audience, but B, we're not being served as well by others out there as much, and we started to really focus some of our content decisions and our marketing decisions on reaching that group.
That's great. And I see, so I'm going to kind of put you on the spot with this next question a bit, Peter. But Liz Smith has a question. She says, I'm curious to know if you know of any research showing the ROI of audience first communications versus the classic big check photo communications. So she wants to know, how do we know that these methods are more effective?
I don't have an ROI measure, but I do know that it would be useful for me to try to see if there's any research out there. But just in terms of what I've been able to see in terms of what people share and talk about and engage with, communications that are a lot more engaging and put the focus on what the user can do with that information to achieve a result are much more likely to receive achieve results. I don't have figures to show it off the top of my head, but just in my immersion in kind of the nonprofit world over these years and in social media and even in looking at which organizations do the best jobs of telling their stories and are growing more quickly, they tend to be the ones who are using those tactics versus some of the more traditional kind of one-way communications tactics.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think I can't think of anything off the top of my head, like a specific ROI measurement, but I feel like I've read many articles and white papers and things over the years that prove that this works. So I'm going to try to dig some of those up and send at least one of them out in our resources after. But I'm totally with you, Peter. I think when I get communications from nonprofits and social causes that I support, and I can tell that it's been personalized to me and they're thinking about me as a person, not just as another check or volunteer, I'm more likely to continue donating. I'm more likely to continue volunteering. So I think a big part of this too is thinking about how you would like to be treated as a donor or a volunteer or a constituent, and think about how you would like to be, what you would like your relationship with the causes you care about to be like.
Absolutely, and think about what appeals to you as a reader and consumer of information. Going old school, thinking about what stories in the newspaper you read or what things get your attention online now, and even think about which of your friends you're most likely to want to engage with. Do you want to engage with the friend who's talking about herself all the time, or do you want to be the one engage with the one who's actually asking you how you're doing and talking to you rather than at you?
Yep, absolutely. So D. Robinson asked the question, and we might have spoken to this a bit before, but I think we could get a bit more specific. Do you have good sources for demographic research that can help you determine where your audience is most likely to engage with your content, or do you recommend trial and error testing over time?
I think it's a combination of both. Now, I think if you, for instance, know what geography is most likely to connect with you, or if you're a place-based organization, I think some of the tools we showed earlier can help you get some of that demographic information pretty easily now. The Census Bureau has it. The Chronicles How America Gives database has it, and that ESRI tool, kind of in a fun way, provides you some really interesting demographic information about geographies. And you can start to get a sense of geographies too in your own data. If you have a mailing list, you know where you're mailing more things to than others, and you can start to kind of get that a little bit more refined by taking a closer look at that data. For non-place-based organizations, or for demographic data that's not based on place, some of it is found through trial and error, and some of it can be found through some A/B testing too, sending messages to different groups of people and seeing who responds and who is more likely to pick up on it may give you a better sense of what demographics are most interested in your organization, and then you can start to do research into that demographic a little bit deeper. And I also, that there's no substitute for doing one-on-one communications with people and talking to them directly about what's most interesting and important to them. You can gain a lot just by, spending a little bit of time each month calling up 5 of your supporters or 5 random people and just kind of asking them what they're most interested in and what connects them most to your cause, and starting to build some profiles out that way based on some of the commonalities of what they're talking about.
Yep, and we got a good kind of follow-up question on that from Tiffany Wolin, who asked, do you have a recommendation on good software to help you gather more details on those connecting with you on social media? And I can say from my experience, what C3 uses for our social media is Sprout Social. It's actually a Chicago-based company, and it does social media scheduling, monitoring, analytics, and I found that it does have really good analytics. It'll give you more demographic information, like do you have more males or females on certain networks, what age groups, what demographics. So I think that's really good for social media. And then in terms of websites, I think Google Analytics is absolutely fantastic, especially with some of the new updates that they've made to Universal Analytics. It really allows you to go deep and track some really interesting demographic information about the people who are visiting your website, what pages they're visiting, what other stuff they've clicked on in the past that will tell you more about who they are. So it's kind of freaky and big brothery that you can get so much information. But then when you're on the other end of the spectrum and you want to be actually learning more about your audience so that you can give them better content, it's really helpful and very interesting. So do you have anything to add to that, Peter?
Well, I was going to talk about Google Analytics too, and they are really they continue to make improvements to that tool to give you much richer information about who's coming to your site and what their paths are and who they are and where they're coming from and at what times. That's really useful information. That data is very useful. If you have an email list and you always have to balance asking people so many questions that they don't want to actually go through the process of signing up with trying to collect enough information from them, but being able to maybe ask a couple of extra questions of them when they sign up, you can get some more, you can start to get some more data about who's connecting with you that way. I would, and on top of that, even if you're hosting events or participating in chats and other things, just trying to see if you can gain a little bit of extra information about the people who are coming to be able to round out those profiles more. But the online and social tools that you gave already, Bridget, are excellent ones.
Yeah, and that's another great suggestion too, just asking your audience questions. I know you said earlier, actually just sitting down with people and being able to have an interview with them is great. And if you're not able to do interviews with people, I think one of the best ways to collect information is just asking people when they sign up for your list to find out a little more about them. I know when people sign up for our C3 email list, we send them an email right away that asks them a few basic questions that will help us segment them on the right list so that they're getting stuff that they care about more. So even on a user side, if you are someone who frequently ignores those questions, usually it's just something so that a nonprofit or anybody whose stuff you're signing up for is so that they can give you better content. And I think for me, it's also good for me to experiment with filling out some of those forms that I get when I sign up for email newsletters and things like that, so I can see how other people try to learn more about their audience and think about how I could apply that to some of the content that I'm producing. And so I know we just have a minute here, so actually there's a question from Aaron Altman that I feel like would be a good note to end on. So he asked, does this strategy of defining a target audience allow a very local nonprofit to go even more regional or even national with their message? So thinking about growth and using your audience to take your message to an even wider audience and reach even more people in a powerful way. What do you think about that, Peter?
Yeah, I think we've talked about trying to narrow, but there are opportunities here to find out what's common about the people that you're reaching in a smaller community and start to figure out how you scale that up. What are some of the common traits that people maybe in your smaller region or among your smaller audience, what are some of the common traits that they have with people outside of that area, and what has appealed to them, and then really start to build out your communications and reach people on a bigger level by kind of starting to connect what's, what is true of the people outside of your area with those who are in it. I don't know if I articulated that well at all, but I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it.
I totally agree. So thank you so much, Peter. It's 2:00, so I'm going to let everybody get back to work. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. I'm going to be sending out the slides and recording from this webinar in the next few days, and I'll also include some resources that Peter and I both mentioned during the webinar. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. This was a terrific conversation, and really appreciate all the time that all of you gave for this. So thank you very much.
All right. Bye, everyone.